conflict come up this morning, and so he has pre-recorded his content for today, and I will be facilitating as best I can. So if you have any questions, pop it in the chat, interrupt, but otherwise, I will facilitate his PowerPoint. So with that, we'll get started.
The series Grit in the Academy. This was intended to be a live session, but I apologize. I've had something come up that has required me to record this for your viewing pleasure and edification at your convenience. So thank you for joining me. I believe one of my colleagues will be moderating the session live and fielding any questions that you might have. So hopefully it'll be productive, even though you don't have me live. But it is this session is entitled "The Obstacle is the Way: Responding to Adversity in Academic Life." I want to start this session with a little personal vignette about an obstacle that I faced in my career in the past. From 2010 to 2015, I was the country director for an organization called International Justice Mission in Rwanda, a small country in East Africa. Most people think of the genocide in 1994 when they hear Rwanda, the movie Hotel Rwanda. That was the place. We moved there 16 years after the genocide, and there were still the effects of, as you can imagine, 800,000 to 1 million people being killed in the genocide, that the society was still affected by it. The organization I led did child sexual assault casework. We provided legal aid and trauma counseling to sexually abused kids. Very difficult work. I employed social workers, ex-police officers that would help investigations, lawyers, those types of professionals, and we assisted individuals who'd been abused. So in 2010, I started there. It was a new type of case we were working on, so I brought in a system for how to evaluate case referrals, how we could investigate these cases, working with local actors that knew the context more thoroughly than I did, and a process for us to move forward in these cases. About 10 months after we started, we had our first case go to trial, and it was the case of a very young girl who'd been abused, sexually abused. We had eyewitness statements that the child and the abuser went off into this cornfield together. We had the girl's testimony of what happened that was the same as the eyewitness testimony. Obviously, we didn't have a confession by the abuser. We had some medical evidence of the abuse, but in Rwanda, they don't have a lot of the capacity to collect and store this type of evidence. But we felt with what we had, it was a slam dunk case, that we were going to win this case. We were going to get justice for this little girl and move on in victory. And I recall it was a Friday. We were eagerly awaiting the judge's decision, ready to celebrate this victory. And we got the call from one of our lawyers, and the judge found the abuser not guilty. We were understandably devastated, angry. We felt like we had failed this girl and her family, and it was devastating. And I had these thoughts of failure and what are we even doing here? If we can't win a case like this, what value are we adding? And so I had a choice as the leader, and we had a choice as a team to decide, are we going to press on or are we not? And so we met and huddled as a team. We talked, we prayed together, we talked through what could we do differently, what could we do more of, and we got a plan that, you know what, we can't control the judge, we can't control the prosecutors, all we can control is what we do. And we decided that we needed to do more to prepare these cases for trial, to secure justice for our clients. And so we Our investigators worked more closely with the local police in our next case. They essentially did the investigation for the police. Obviously, we couldn't handle evidence, so the police were there when we gathered evidence and took statements from eyewitnesses. We worked with prosecutors on the law, how to prosecute these cases effectively. We even did some judge training on what the value on certain evidence and how to get statements from the abuser without re-traumatizing them, especially children. And it was a lot more work for the next case with maybe a little bit less solid evidence, but we had done so much more work that the second case, when it went to trial, we again thought we had a great opportunity, a great chance to win this one, but we were a little gun shy. We weren't counting our eggs yet. And when the result came in as a conviction, I want to tell you, man, we celebrated because we understood then the cost of success and what it took to succeed. And I am convinced that if we had won that first case, we would not have had the same success down the road that we did, because that failure, that obstacle showed us how hard this was going to be, how much work it was going to take, how much diligence. And because of that challenge and our response of working harder, more thoroughly, we ended up with roughly an 80% conviction case in the cases that we took, when cases that we weren't involved with had a roughly 20 to 25% conviction rate there in Rwanda. So this is not at all to toot my own horn. It was a hard time, a tough time, but to show that sometimes difficulties, obstacles, challenges, as frustrating, as defeating as they can be, really are opportunities for growth and provide even greater victory on the other side of it. And so in that theme, we're talking today about The Obstacle is the Way, and that is the title of a book by Ryan Holiday that forms the basis of a lot of this material. And one of his big points is that challenges are not interruptions to meaningful work. They are often the pathway through which growth occurs. And so that's going to be the framework through which we look at this session today. So we're going to talk about a scenario and discuss some responses to it, a scenario that I think we can all relate to. So the scenario is that any department, whether you're in faculty, staff, communications, recruiting, whatever it may be, there may be budget pressure, staffing shortages, changing priorities, emotional exhaustion. All of these things we've all faced in different roles. So think about it in your team, in your office. How do different people respond under this same pressure? You're all experiencing it together, but do some experience it and respond differently than others? I suspect so. You may see some that burn out. Some may quit dealing with this. Some might hold their breath until new leadership comes in. Others might see the situation as it is and think, what can I do to change things? What can we accomplish despite these challenges? How can I grow from this challenge? And that's the dichotomy, that resilience is not avoiding difficulty. It's learning how to move through it, how to shift from being one of the ones that says, gosh, this is so hard, I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna throw my hands up, to one who says, yes, this is hard, this stinks, I wish it was better, but what can I do to change things? What can I grow? How can I grow from what we all are all going through? What can I learn from these challenges? So again, we're going to draw from Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, and he has 3 steps that he recommends for this shift of mindset, as we talked about last time with Carol Dweck, the mindset shift. He's got a similar one in this book. So shifting to developing that growth mindset for him has 3 steps: perception, action, and will. And we're going to talk about each of these in turn, what they mean, and then a practical tool to apply those steps. So the first one is perception, choosing your interpretation of the situation. And one of his big ideas is that the event itself is often less important than the meaning that we assign to it. So the event is a reality, something difficult or bad happened. But how we respond to that determines what we do next. And the meaning we assign to that drives how we respond to it. So when something goes wrong, our first reaction is often, this shouldn't be happening, this is unfair, this proves I'm failing, this is going to ruin everything. Whereas perception asks, what if my first impression was incomplete? Like the first impression is this just ruins it, or this is unfair, I'm failing. Perception then asks, what if my interpretation is incomplete? And so the challenge is, think about a current challenge and what story are you telling yourself about it? How big have you made it? Again, it may be a big deal, but how has your interpretation of it hindered or helped you move on? Is there another way to interpret this? And a similar big idea from Ryan Holiday that we talked about before is that we cannot always control events. In fact, we rarely can control events, but we can influence how we interpret them. An old pastor used to say, our attitude determines our altitude, that we can control how we respond to the events in our life. And that's a discipline that comes with experience, with maturity, with practice, but that is a reality that when we can't control events, we can control how we respond and interpret to them. So how do we do this? I'm going to give you a practical tool from the reading in some of these books. And by the way, I love that quote on that book there by Marcus Aurelius: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. I just bought this book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, because I've seen so many quotes of him from 2,000 years ago on this topic of resilience and grit. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure I can recommend it because it's been profound so far. So the practical tool. When facing frustration, pause. Don't let your thoughts run away from you and just defeat you with the reality. You may have a visceral emotional reaction like we did back with International Justice Mission. That first case, we were devastated, we were angry, we were sad, totally natural. But once we experienced that, we just paused, prepared our minds for action. Then we named the challenge. That's the second step. Pause and then name the challenge. This is what we're facing. So you got a paradigm for what you can do next. And then ask, what facts do I know? What assumptions am I making? What opportunity exists here? So it's essentially taking a step back and just almost trying to take an objective, removing your subjectivity, taking a step back and having an objective view of like, yes, this is a bad situation. Well, let's name what we're facing and then objectively think through, what do we know about it? What assumptions are we making? And then look for opportunities. It's a powerful step. It's difficult because we're so wrapped up in the emotions of our day-to-day jobs and the challenges that we face. But with support from a team and you as a leader, coaching your team through this process really is powerful. So now that you've change your perception, the next step is action. And Holiday says this is focus on what you can do. And his admonition is once we've chosen a constructive perspective, gotten that objective view, explored what the opportunities are, we must act. We can't sit in that situation. We must find ways to act. Again, experience the emotions of it, feel it, and then get that better perspective. Don't continue to complain, but ask, what is the useful next step? And I underlined next step there because you're not looking for the entire solution, just the next step. One baby step, as Bill Murray said in that movie with Richard Dreyfuss. What about Bob? Baby steps. What can you do first? What is the next step? So a practical tip for this action is called the circle of control. And I'm sure some of you all have seen this. But the encouragement is to very simply draw 3 circles. The first one in the center is the circle of control. It's your effort, your preparation, your attitude. That's what you can control, and that's what's in the middle. The circle outside of that is your circle of influence, which could be your colleagues, the team culture, the relationships that you have, things that you may not be able to control, but that you can influence as you take this next step. And the third circle is the circle of concern. Office politics, external decisions, budget, that type of thing. Things that are beyond your control, but that may need to change through what you can control and your circle of influence. Holiday's admonition is to focus primarily on what you can control and what you can influence. As an example from this IJM experience in Rwanda, we couldn't control the police. We couldn't control the judges. All we could do is control our effort and what we could do to influence judges, police, prosecutors. And so by refining our processes, developing material to train those external actors to exert influence was what we tried to do to change the outcome which we could not control. And it worked in our situation. Again, not perfect, but that's an example of how it could work. Progress is often made through the next right action, not the perfect plan, but it takes this intentionality. And the final step from Holiday is called will, like the force of will. Endure what cannot be immediately changed. Change takes time. Change does not come immediately. Even if you've developed the right perspective and developed an action plan, it takes time to overcome these significant challenges. It took us 10 months with IJM for that next case to come forward to get a better result. And so this portion is on what to do to make it through that time while you're pushing to overcome the obstacle. Some of these obstacles that may take time are institutional change. Obviously, that's not something that happens overnight. Budget constraints, leadership turnover, personal setbacks. But will is the ability to endure without becoming bitter or defeated. And when I talk about this being the ability to endure without becoming bitter or defeated, you're going to have moments of bitterness and feeling defeat while facing some of these obstacles. That's natural. But as long as your baseline, as long as what you come back to is this will to persevere, to push through, to do what you can control, and use the influence you have to effect change, as long as you can keep coming back to that, that's what will is about. Some practical examples here. If you're looking for long-term institutional change, which may take years, will asks, can I stay committed even when progress feels slow? Finding things that keep you in the fight over extended periods of time. And that may be colleagues of the same mind. It may be reminding yourself why you got into the work, your why, the vision that you're aiming for. All are things that can strengthen your will to endure that long slog. Career setbacks, denied promotion, a grant being rejected, a failed initiative. Again, Will asks, how do I continue moving forward despite the disappointment? With our office here, we've submitted 4 different grant applications to a character building organization that is right in line with what we do, and we keep getting rejected. And we're faced with, do we keep going after this thing? Or do we throw our hands up and say, screw it, we can't do it? I think we're going to keep going after it because it is so aligned with what we want to do. But finding the will to do so is going to be something to focus on. And third is workplace frustration. None of us have that though, right? Could be a policy you disagree with, for an example. But the question is, how can I remain effective while this remains out of my control? So finding ways to be effective despite the ongoing obstacle is an act of will that takes time and practice to develop. How do we do that? How do we develop that will? And there's one tool called the not forever reframe, which is just as it sounds. When facing a difficult season, ask, will this challenge look the same 1 year from now, 6 months from now, whatever your time frame is? The answer is going to be usually be no, that things change. And when you can get that longer term perspective that things are going to change, I want to be a part of it. I want to be here when it happens. That can help create perspective, which keeps the vision alive and can carry you on through the hard times. Now, if the answer, whether objectively or your subjectivity wins out, and the answer is no, nothing's going to change in a year, you've got other decisions to make about whether you want to invest your time in that initiative or not. But with objectivity, I think you'll find that most often you will see that, yes, things change. Things change to get to where we are now. They can change again. I want to close with reference to one of the most profound books I've ever read. The title's there on the screen, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor who, after the war, he survived. He wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. And what he found was that a lot of the people that he was in the concentration camps with died not so much from malnutrition, starvation, abuse, but from despair, that they had lost the vision for living and the will to live. Whereas he, as a musician, as an educator, a family person, he maintained his will to live because of wanting to live for these other things. And that kept his will alive. Now, that's obviously a very different situation than we find ourselves in with work challenges. But the lesson is instructive, that when we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's a quote from Frankl. That finding the will, finding the reason to carry on through difficulty, through challenge, often reaps great rewards. I can testify that from my time with IJM. Again, we had great success after that first setback because of that first setback. So I'll close here with just a summary of what we've talked about from the Obstacle is the Way book. First, perception. How am I viewing this challenge? Taking a step, pausing, reflecting, looking at your assumptions, and then trying to take an objective look as to how am I viewing this challenge? And then taking action. What is the next useful step? What options are open for me to take one step towards where we want to go with this change. And then thirdly is developing that will. If I can't change this today, how will I endure it? Find something that keeps you pressing into that challenge to overcome it over the long term. I hope this has been useful for you all. It was useful for me to relive the experience from 15 years ago with IJM and to be encouraged myself from experiencing a group of people that overcame a real challenge through this process of reflection, action, perseverance, and will. It really is an option for you, and I hope this has been useful. The resources I drew on, if it's of interest to you, are The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, a book called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. Sheryl Sandberg worked at, I believe it was Facebook, experienced her husband passing away, and a lot of it is her overcoming that life challenge. And then Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Any questions about this, any follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to engage with you on this, and we'll do one more session to close out this series, which I'll refer to in the next slide. So next week, we'll focus on meaning, sustainability, and resilient leadership in higher education. So we'll keep pressing deeper into this this effort to develop greater and greater grit, resilience, perseverance in our work in higher ed. So thank you for joining me. Hope to see you next week.
Thanks all for joining in. I know Lane wishes he could be here with us, but I'm glad he recorded that for us. It's a great message for all of us. Reach out to him if you have any questions. Does anybody have anything in the chat you want to contribute? I think grit, resilience are such hard things that we have to do. So thank you all for being here, and he'll send out the normal stuff he sends out, I'm sure. Otherwise, he'll see you next week. Y'all have a good one.